Hello guys, and welcome back to another video. And in this video I'm going to change gears a little bit. I'm going to get away from working on the railroad and show you guys the approach that I'm going to be taking to make the molds for my rock castings. So I'm not going to be using latex rubber mold. I'm going to show you guys a different technique that I've just recently learned. This will be the first time that I've done this, so I guess it'll be kind of a learning experience for both of us. But what I'm going to be using here is 100% silicone. Now, you can purchase the silicone pretty much at any hardware store for probably a third to a half the price of what you pay for, say, the Woodland Scenics rubber mold, latex rubber mold. As far as the application is concerned, it's a little different how you build your mold, and I'll show you guys how I built mine. And if you're looking for a more economical way to build your rock castings versus, say, using the rubber latex or buying the castings, I think Woodland Scenic sells those as well. This might be an avenue for you to take. So what I'm doing here in the video, obviously I've gone down to the creek and I've picked out several rocks that I think will look good on my layout. I'm going to have several sheared rock walls on my layout, so I tried to find some with pretty much a flat surface, at least one of the facets of the rock being relatively flat and showing a little bit of granulation in the rock as well. So what I've done here is, while my wife was gone, I filled up the sink with dishwashing detergent, and I've got a wire brush, and I'm just trying to clean the rocks off right now, get them nice and clean so I don't have any residual sediment that gets casted into the silicone mold. Okay, so I've got my plastic coffee container here, and I've added generous amounts of dishwashing detergent to warm water. And the reason for the dishwashing detergent is it actually serves two purposes. It helps the silicone to cure quicker, as well as it keeps the silicone from sticking to your hands as you're applying the silicone to make the casting. Also note, I've got a strip of plexiglass there that I'm going to be using because the silicone will definitely adhere to whatever it is you put it on, so you may want to be mindful of that. Okay, so the materials that we're going to be using is this 100% silicone, and it comes in various colors. I chose black. And I got this stuff at Home Depot for, I think it was like $6 for a canister, and it's relatively cheap actually. I also found this cheesecloth at Walmart in the hobby section. Now this is kind of similar to a gauze bandage or strip or whatever. We'll be using this here to reinforce the casting, as well as dipping it into plaster of Paris when we go to construct our mountains. So as you can see, I got a bunch here for like $10, and hopefully it'll last me the whole layout. Okay, so we begin by emptying out the silicone into the water soap mixture, and I did use the whole canister of silicone. I was able to get 2 rock castings out of it. They were actually a little bit on the thick side when I made them. I probably could have thinned it out a little more and got 3. But like I said, I mean, $6 for 3 rock castings is, is pretty good actually. Not to mention just the convenience of being able to, go to the hardware store and buy materials, to make your rock castings. Okay, so after I've dispensed the silicone into the soap water mixture, I begin to knead it into a ball. I'm just looking for something that I can work with when I apply it to the rock to the faces of the rock. So I guess if you were doing multiple rock casting molds, you could probably ration it out and knead it into balls for the appropriate size casting that you want to cast. But in this particular instance, I just went ahead and kneaded it all together into one big ball. Okay, so after I've got the silicone kneaded out, I start applying it to the face of the rock. So what I do is I just tear off little pieces of silicone from the ball that I kneaded and just apply it to the face of the rock. Now I do push down firmly when I'm applying it, and the reason being is because you want the silicone to conform to all the nooks and crannies of the rock, so you're picking up all the detail. Okay, so here's what it looks like after I've applied the silicone. Keep in mind that the silicone here is still wet and tacky. It hasn't cured yet, and I want it to be like that at this point. But as you can see, I didn't take the mold all the way down to the plexiglass. I just felt like the molds were already deep enough, at least for the type of rock castings that I wanted to cast. Okay, so the next step in this process is to apply the cheesecloth to the wet silicone. So I cut off some pieces that were big enough to cover up the entire mold for each mold, and just kind of push the cheesecloth into the mold to kind of embed the cheesecloth, if you will, into the mold. I probably could have applied this a little quicker than I did. I don't remember how long I waited. I think I waited about 10 minutes, and that silicone had already started to set up a little bit, so the cheesecloth did not embed itself into the mold as much as I'd like to have seen it. But all in all, I think the end result turned out just fine. Then I come back in with the second layer of silicone, again just kind of pressing firmly, this time more just to hold the cheesecloth in place. I also use my fingers just to kind of spread it out a little bit more thinly now, because I wasn't too much concerned at this point with trying to maintain any type of variation in the rock face, since the first layer had already been applied. Okay, so this is what it looks like after I applied the second coat of silicone. So what I did is I took those and set those aside and let those dry thoroughly. In all honesty, it took about 4 or 5 days, because water wants to get trapped between the rock and the silicone, so it takes it a while to dry. As you can see here, I've got the molds peeled away from the rocks, and they actually turned out pretty good. I've got a thin spot on this one. I think I'll point to it here in a second. Yeah, right there, you can see light coming through. So I had to go back and patch that up a little bit. But all in all, they turned out well. They're durable, they're flexible, and I think they're going to make for some nice molds. Okay, so now what I do is I just take me some sharp utility scissors and just kind of trim the cheesecloth away so it doesn't get in the way when I go to pour the plaster of Paris into the mold. So just cleaning them up a little bit. And so here's what they look like when they're done. You can't really tell from the light, but they're actually greatly detailed. I was very pleased with how they turned out. So it really feels like a rubber mold to the touch. It feels like a thick rubber mold to the touch. But yeah, so I think those will be usable for my layout. So here's I bought a 25-pound bag of plaster of Paris at Home Depot. I think I paid like $15, and I'll definitely get my money's worth out of this bag. Okay, so here I'm getting ready to mix up my plaster of Paris. It's 2 parts plaster of Paris to 1 part water. So I'm going to go ahead and mix this together. Now, the water I use is cold. I recommend using cold water. It gives you a little bit more working time with the plaster of Paris. But in all honesty, just pouring rock castings is probably not going to make that much of a difference. But if you do use plaster of Paris on some scenery work, you might want to keep that in mind. Okay, so I take my my professional white stirring stick there and begin to mix the plaster of Paris and water mixture slowly. I did not pour all the water in there. And if you notice, I'm not really like agitating it with the spoon. I'm just kind of stirring it slowly, and the reason being is because the slower the stir motion, the more time you'll have to work with the plaster of Paris. Again, you just might want to keep this in mind, you know, if you're going to be doing any scenery work with plaster of Paris. And there I'm just showing you a shot of what the consistency is looking like. Here I go and add a little bit more water. Here I needed to add a little bit more plaster of Paris. The consistency you're looking for is about like pancake batter, and that's just a little bit too runny, so I needed to add just a little bit more plaster of Paris just to thicken things up. So now I'm going to go ahead and cast the mold. So I've got me a box here with some sand in it. I use that to support the bottom of the mold so that I can get the mold level so that no plaster of Paris runs out. What I was just pointing at there was where I patched up that hole on that one mold that I was telling you earlier, where it was a little bit too thin. But here the idea is just to get the mold situated in the sand so that the plaster of Paris doesn't run out. And I'll go ahead and just start spooning some into the mold. So after I get the amount of plaster of Paris I want in the mold, just kind of smooth it out a little bit, and I can already see bubbles rising to the surface of the plaster of Paris, which is what you want. So there I'm just kind of tapping on the box, and I think I tap on the mold here shortly just to try to get the air bubbles to rise to the surface so that you don't have air bubbles on the actual face of the plaster of Paris that you're going to be modeling. And so here I was going to just cast the one mold and let the other mold dry a little bit more, or I'd patched it, but I decided to go ahead and just since I had a batch of plaster of Paris made up, I decided to go ahead and use the other mold. So just adding the other mold to the box of sand, making sure it's nice and level. So again, I just take my finger and tap the side of the mold just to try to get the air bubbles to work their way up to the top. Found it pretty productive as well to sit there and kind of agitate the corner of the box like that. That helped to make some of the air bubbles rise as well in the plaster. So in the next video we'll reveal the rock castings, see how they look, and I'll show you guys techniques I use to paint rock castings, and hopefully we'll have some nice looking castings that we can use for the layout. So I hope this was helpful, guys, and it's an alternative way to do rock castings without having to pay a lot of money, especially if you're doing you want a variation of rock formation. You'd have to buy a lot of rubber mold to make your castings, and this way it's a little bit more economical. So I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.